President, please be seated. The court is now back in session, and we would like to hand over to counsel for Mr. Kyew Somphon to continue putting questions to the witness.
Thank you, President. Mr. Rokoff, we'll just pick up where we left off before the break. You say that you have a very clear recollection of the dropping of B-52 American bombs on the 15th of August 1973. My question to you is as follows. To your knowledge, do you believe that the Lon Nol troops had at their disposal aircraft and a fleet of aircrafts?
I would not call it a fleet. It was not a very big air force. But yes, after the American bombing halt of 15 August, the Khmer Air Force had very limited assets. Other than helicopters, for attack they had the American single-engine T-28 that would drop bombs, 250-pound bombs. That was the extent of what the Cambodian Air Force was capable of. I could not give you an estimate of how many aircraft. They had reconnaissance aircraft. They had C-47s, twin-engine aircraft, American-made. That was for transport. C-123s, which were American Air Force. But it was limited, the Cambodian Air Force. So actually the air war was reduced easily by 95% or more after 15 August.
And would it be a logical conclusion to say that 5% of the remaining bombing would have occurred with the remaining ammunition and equipment that you have just listed for us?
Yes, the ammunition and bombs for these aircraft, it was brought into Cambodia. The intense American bombing campaign, none of that originated in Cambodia. It just ended up in Cambodia. But the Cambodian Air Force on the military side of Po Chin Tong Air Base, very limited in the close air support they provided the Cambodian Army, which changed everything regarding tactics used by the Lon Nol forces.
And when you say that there was a dramatic impact on the means used, what exactly do you mean? What kind of tactics were being deployed afterwards?
Well, when the U.S. was supporting, you could always count on American airstrikes assisting the Cambodian Army unit if it was in trouble. You could not rely on that afterwards. The Cambodian Air Force had limited resources, and you just could not count on them in a bad situation. So the Army was very conservative in how they deployed people, how they planned operations after the bombing halt. Probably to avoid having large number of soldiers cut off, isolated. Say, Pagoda, which was occupied by Lon Nol forces, surrounded by the Khmer Rouge. The soldiers knew they would be protected by the ring of bombs dropped by the Americans around the pagoda. That protection ended 15 August, so that's why I say the nature of the fighting seemed to differ after 15 August.
Je vous remercie de ces précisions.
Thank you very much for those details. I now wish to move on to a different line of questioning. Once again, I seek some clarification with respect to a photo that was presented to you yesterday by Judge Laverne. It is part and parcel of a document that belongs to DCCAM and that was sent to the Office of the Co-Prosecutors. It is part of a bundle of documents entitled, and I will cite this in English.
1975, Genocide in Cambodia, a permanent exhibition of the Documentation Center of Cambodia. Avec l'autorisation.
With leave of the President, I would like to have the last page of this document displayed. It is a photo that was commented upon by the witness. It is a depiction of a woman who is weeping next to the corpse of her husband. Mr. President, may I please have your leave to have this image displayed on the screens?
The President, you may proceed.
Ça va être affiché dans un moment, mais
I believe the photo will be projected very shortly, but I believe that this may take some time since the document is a PDF file.
j'aimerais que
If possible, would it be possible to also have the caption written by DCCAM displayed as well? Mr. Witness, you have before you the photo as well as the caption, which is dated April 17th, 1975. You stated, however, that this shot was taken prior to the fall of Phnom Penh, possibly 1 month before the capture of Phnom Penh. Were you ever contacted by DCCAM prior to the permanent exhibition of a collection of photos which also included some of your own works?
I wish I had been contacted by Mr. Yuk Chang regarding this. He received a number of prints from the collection of Peter McGuire, has a considerable amount of my photography in his collection. The caption is wrong. It was not 17 April. I know that's a mistake. I had nothing to do with that mistake. I also do intend to cooperate with DCCAM regarding other photos to add to the collection, but I am sorry the caption was mistaken on that one photo.
je vous remercie de.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Moving on to a different line of questioning now. Earlier on, in response to questions put to you by my colleague, Mr. Koppe, you talked about the living conditions of refugees prior to the 17th of April 1975, and you even went on to say that within some of your work you had undertaken some pro bono work to depict the situation of residents in Phnom Penh. You worked for 2 organizations, including the International Committee for the Red Cross. I stand corrected, you worked for 3. You also said that you did some work for the Catholic Relief Service and another. My question to you is as follows. Do you have a recollection of any other organizations that were devoted to working on the refugee situation in Phnom Penh and in the surrounding areas of Phnom Penh?
There were very few organizations here during the war, and the term NGO or non-governmental organization was not used in those days. But yes, the organizations I mentioned earlier, I contributed work to, not as an employee, but doing photography, which they had requirements for. There were not many relief agencies here during the war.
Toujours.
You indicated that, roughly speaking, prior to the fall of Phnom Penh, you believed that there were approximately 2.4 million refugees. You took photos of the Hotel Cambodiana, of refugee camps. Were you ever spoken to about the significant sanitary problems that were dominant in refugee camps and around the city?
Did somebody, I believe your question asked me, did anybody discuss the sanitation situation? No, it was very self-evident what the situation was in the camps. Then you have the sanitation problems in the parks where you had thousands of people living. It was self-evident to me. I can't say anybody discussed it with me.
And one final clarification on that point. You were in Phnom Penh between 1973 and 1975. Did you see the surge of refugees happen very quickly, or did the swelling of the number of refugees happen very suddenly or over a prolonged period of time?
Prolonged period of time. I could not say what percentage of the 2 million plus became refugees before or after 15 August. The stream of refugees fleeing contested areas continued way after the American bombing halt. It was very intense in the couple of weeks prior to April 17 because many of the refugee camps outside of Phnom Penh, the people fled. The fighting was so close it was not safe for them to stay in the camp. So there were a few camps that dissolved and the people fled to the inner city. But I would say the refugee influx continued the entire 2 years I was here. I couldn't say if it was intense after the 15th of August. I don't have statistics. People like the International Committee of the Red Cross have documentation to that effect. I said yesterday I took the photos at the ICRC villa that was rented in Phnom Penh, and it was told to me there were over 1 million index cards with the family information for refugees. And what happened to that archive, I have no idea. But the identical copy of those cards was also in Switzerland at ICRC headquarters. So they have an idea of the numbers of people. Many, many thousands of refugees did not go to the camps, so they are not counted.
Thank you very much for those clarifications. Let us move on to a new line of questioning concerning the 17th of April 1975. There was a long discussion on one or several Khmer Rouge factions that you saw that morning. Allow me to refresh your memory and ask you, first and foremost, if you recall, upon your arrival in Thailand, in the second convoy that left the Embassy of France, do you recall having described your experience or relaying your account to any colleagues or people at the embassy in Bangkok?
I have no colleagues at the embassy in Bangkok. I did discuss with colleagues who are journalists. When I crossed the bridge into Thailand, first comments I made to anybody upon liberation from Democratic Kampuchea was an interview on the Thai side of the bridge with Edward Bradley of 60 Minutes. His Thai cameraman, Tanun Harunsi, filmed me being interviewed. I remember his camera pointed to my face, and then as I loosened my belt, pulled my pants out a bit so I could reach down and pull the 23 rolls of film that I wrapped in plastic and taped to my leg. A smuggling trick. I pulled the film out. He had panned the camera down. As a nice sequence of that. The questions that Ed Bradley asked consisted of such as, do you believe there will be a bloodbath? And I said, yes. He asked, how many do you think? And I said, who knows? 1,000, 10,000. How many does it take for a bloodbath? I forget some of the other questions. I believe that film is in archives in the U.S. I know it's on Vanderbilt University's archive, and it could have been obtained, but my memory is very hazy.
Excusez-moi.
Yes.
Pardon me. Pardon me, Mr. Rakov. Perhaps there is a misunderstanding because I wasn't asking you about any interview with journalists. My question to you was, did you have any discussion or interview with anyone from the American embassy in Bangkok? Anybody who was working at the American embassy in Bangkok? Do you have any recollection of any such discussion or interview?
In 1975, no. But in Bangkok, I did run into an American who used to work at the U.S. Embassy in Phnom Penh. I can't consider it a proper interview in that we had a few drinks in a bar on Patpong. I had a bowl of Shanghai noodles, and there were questions asked, but I do not consider that an interrogation. I did not connect with anybody from the U.S. Embassy in Bangkok in 75.
Avec votre tour.
Mr. President, with your leave, I would like to show a telegram from the Embassy of the U.S. in Bangkok. The telegram is only in English. However, I do wish to cite a very brief passage, and with your leave, I would like to have this shown on the screen. The reference is D291/6.3.2.31. D291/6.3.1.31. The ERN in English is 00495 47450. And I see that my learned colleague from the co-prosecutors is on his feet.
The President, Mr. Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I note, to my knowledge, this document was not included on the defense exhibit lists, nor on ours. And I'm not aware of counsel bringing any motion. Nonetheless, for the record, We do not object to them using the document, but I do want to make clear that this is not a document that the defense has put before the chamber.
If I may be authorized to reply, Mr. President, this was not a document that we intended to use. The interest of this document only emerged over the course of Mr. Rokov's testimony, and I believe that it can serve to clarify a point, if also to refresh his memory, or to possibly determine if there is an error on the telegram. I believe that Mr. Rokov is the person who's in the best position to address these issues. Therefore, if there's no problem, I would respectfully seek your authorization to use this document in order to bring clarification to the witness's testimony. Thank you.
The President, the document requested by counsel for Mr. Kirsampon is not listed in the list of documents proposed by the counsel and any party to the proceeding, and as has already been advised, party is not allowed to put such a document for examination before any witness, including Mr. Rokov.
Bien simplement.
Very well, Mr. President. I will acknowledge your ruling, and for the record, I would simply state that when the parties were requested to submit their list of documents, it was in relation to the list of witnesses that had been updated at the time, and Mr. Rokov's name was not on the list at the time. I submit to your ruling, and so I will have to make my question a bit more general. Turning to you, Mr. Rokov, there seems to be a document that was emitted by the U.S. Embassy. It is a telegram, and you are mentioned in the telegram. And it describes the fact that you had allegedly seen 3 factions on the 17th of April, 1975. Is the mention of the 3 Khmer Rouge factions accurate and reflective of what you may have told the worker from the U.S. Embassy?
I did not tell a worker from the U.S. Embassy anything. As I related to you in a prior question and answer, I had a drink or two on Pat Pong Road with an American who worked at the embassy in Phnom Penh. Maybe he's relaying stuff second, third hand to somebody at the American embassy in Bangkok. If I referred to Khmer Krahon coming into the city center from 3 different directions, I did not, and I never did use the term factions back then. You don't refer to different platoons in a unit as factions. These are people coming from 3 different directions. I also have never seen that document prior to your bringing it up. It was flashed on the screen momentarily, and I read it. I did not ride around town with any Khmer Ramdas. The Ramdas situation was more than a year earlier, the 600 or so that came over. I don't know who was the source of this document, but he should be re-educated as to the inaccuracies.
Je vous remercie de...
Thank you very much for those clarifications. I will now move on to a very brief and new line of questioning. You talked about your travels to the Ministry of Information on the 17th of April, accompanied by some fellow journalists, and you talked about some of the photos that you had taken that day. My first question to you is this. Of the Khmer Rouge soldiers that you saw on that day, were there any soldiers that you had known or recognized at the Ministry of Information?
No.
Ensuite,
and of the Khmer Rouge soldiers that you saw that day, did you only see soldiers and officers, or did you also see civilians?
Well, let's say the 24 or so functionaries from the Lon Nol regime were almost all in civilian clothes. Whether they had military rank or civil rank, it was hard to tell. There were a few people around in civilian clothes. There was a photograph shown yesterday of Khmer Krajon going up the steps of the ministry. One was barefoot. The person standing inside the doorway with a white shirt, I had to assume was a person who worked at the ministry. Yeah, there was a mix of civilians and military there that morning, and also late afternoon when we were, Sidney Schonberg, John Swain Dithpron, and myself were released from the Japanese bridge and brought to the ministry. There were many more Khmer Rouge, but nobody I recognized. The only incident where a Khmer Krajon recognized me was, as I related the other day, on the convoy out, and the Khmer Rouge standing by the truck yelling, Rokas, 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 and I thought, wow, that's weird, the guy yelling truck, truck, and then I recognized him. All in black, and the person I never saw in black, he was always in white, as he was a desk clerk at the Hotel Royale. And that day he was in Khmer Rouge uniform with his comrades, and armed.
je vous remercie de...
Thank you very much for those specifications. I wish to move on to my last and two final lines of questioning. That brings me to the end of my cross-examination. You talked about your life prior to your departure to Thailand, and you talked about your time at the Embassy of France. And as your source of information, you were able to listen to the BBC on the radio. My question to you is this. Aside from the BBC, were you able to avail yourself to any other sources of information?
Not while in the French embassy, but there was access to radio transcripts, which sometimes would be relayed to me by other journalists. I didn't have access to these documents personally because I was not in the habit of going to the American embassy to go to the USIS, the United States Information Service reading room. They had FBIS transcripts, Foreign Broadcast Information Service transcripts. That is how some of the journalists relayed to me the word going out: when the war is over, people go back home. When war was almost over, you contribute $1 million to the final offensive and you will have a place in the new Cambodia. These are things that came across in the Foreign Broadcast Information Service transcripts. That was something that was provided by State Department to American embassies, radio broadcasts that would be of interest to that country, or say Khmer Rouge radio was translated.
Je vous remercie de ces précisions.
Thank you for that clarification. However, my question to you was, during the time that you were at the embassy, did you have access to those sources? And I'm really referring to the time and the specific days that you were at the Embassy of France from the 17th of April up until the start of May 1975.
We were allowed to keep our radios. There was one day where the Khmer Cajon came into the embassy, searched for transmitters. The allegation was there was a unauthorized radio transmission from within the embassy area. They went through. We had to collect everybody's radios, put them in a pile out in the courtyard. Khmer Rouge came, made sure there was no two-way, such as many of the relief workers had single sideband radios and they could transmit. There were radio broadcasts emanating from the building due east of the French embassy, which at the time was the South Korean embassy. They had electricity going, same as the French embassy. They had electricity right up to the very end, despite most of Phnom Penh being blacked out. We had radios. I could listen to shortwave on my radio, and of course BBC was available. VOA, but VOA didn't tell us much about what was going on, where we were at. That was about it. There was not much available other than BBC, at least as far as reception within our compound.
And one final question for you. You talked about your work as a freelance photographer, meaning that you were working with several types of media and media outlets. And in response to a question put by my colleague, you said that you worked for the New York Times as well as for Newsweek. My question for you is this. Did you know the journalists from Newsweek and who worked for Newsweek? They are called Faye Willey, Willey, Faye Willey, and another journalist called Paul Brinkler-Just. Do these names sound familiar to you?
No, the first name I don't know. Faye, I don't know if you're talking about a male or female. There were numerous correspondents that worked for each particular magazine, and they sometimes rotated in and out. The second name I did not catch. Can you please repeat the second name?
Ça doit être mon accent.
Yes, I'm referring to Paul Brinkler-Just.
I don't know of anyone by that name. I do know a Paul Brinkley Rogers. Is that the person you are asking about?
Si vous le connaissez pas,
It is a journalist who worked for Newsweek. And since you stated that you had worked for Newsweek, I was wondering if you had ever collaborated with those two correspondents.
I have no idea who the first name is. I asked you to repeat the second name. I asked you if it was Paul Brinkley Rogers. Yes, I interact with these people. I did many times for 2 years. I did not work for these organizations. They had no obligation to me. They take film. Sometimes they use it. Sometimes it's a good arrangement. Sometimes not. I never worked for the New York Times. I contributed photographs as a freelance. A lot of times the correspondent comes into town. They have to catch up on events, on things. They need to get up to date on things, so that's where we converse. I fill them in. I am the eyes and the ears for some of these correspondents. Same with Sidney Schonberg in the New York Times. It was very interesting. It was like the dog, the tail wagging the dog. Dith Braun and I would have intimate knowledge about the stories that Sidney Schonberg would be working on. We knew what would be coming out in a few days. Sometimes I do what I have to do. I would discuss it with people such as, say, Ed Bradley for CBS. He has an idea of what's going to be worked on in the next 2 days, 3 days by the New York Times. It is really, really important that, say, CBS evening news editor on his commute from Connecticut to Rockefeller Center, he reads the New York Times, he sees Sydney's story. He would like to have CBS film footage on his desk for that evening news. So sometimes you coordinate things. Would Sydney appreciate what I do? No. We had problems. But as I said, this prawn was the tail that wagged the dog. We provided many things to Schonberg and coordinated, or I would say I did, with regards to others who had a need to know among the journalistic community. Did I work for anybody in particular? No. I would say I was a freelance, and I was lucky if I sold 3 to 5 photographs a month to Associated Press. Maybe once in a blue moon I would have a day rate from Newsweek, but never would they consider me an employee. I would say the main outlets were Associated Press, New York Times, Newsweek, and Time.
Et ce sera ma dernière question à Monsieur Rock.
Mr. Rockoff, this will be my last question regarding Mr. Paul Brinkley Rogers. Was he present with you at the French embassy? Was he one of the foreigners who were at the French embassy between the 17th of April and early May 1975?
Paul Brinkley Rogers was not in Cambodia for the fall of Phnom Penh. He was not among the 8 Americans in the in the French embassy. Actually, there were 7 Americans, and the 8th one was Paul Ignatius, who was under UN passport. I knew Paul Brinkley Rogers, and he, unfortunately, was not here for the fall of Phnom Penh.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Rockoff, for taking time to answer my questions. I wish you a safe trip back home. I am done, Mr. President.
The President. Thank you, Counsel. Mr. Al-Rockoff, your testimony has now come to a conclusion, and you are now excused. You may feel free to go to your place, and the court is very grateful indeed to your attendance. Your testimony helps ascertain the truth, and we appreciate your efforts in giving the testimony for the last 1 day and a half. We wish you all the very best, and we wish you safe travels. Court officer is now instructed to assist with the vessel unit so that Mr. Rockoff is returned to his place safe and sound. We thank you. The President, Counsel for Mr. Kilsampon, you're still on your feet. You may now proceed.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you. I have 2 points I would like to raise. The first point is in light of the remark I made on list of parties. I would like to refer the Chamber to document E9/27, which is an Ieng-Seri motion in which paragraph 4 of the document refers to an email sent by Mrs. Susan Lan on the 8th of April 2011, in which she points out that parties are not under a duty to present documents which have to do with witnesses called by other parties. So this is a point I would like to bring before the Chamber, because with regard to examination of that witness, other parties may have difficulties similar to ours. On our list, we don't have documents relating to the witness which we are not aware of. And when we have documents that are relevant and on record, I think it is unfortunate if we are not allowed to use them. That is the first point. The second point, Mr. President, is this. As I pointed out yesterday, Mr. Kyo Sampan is still very tired following his hospitalization. He would like to confirm that he waives his presence at tomorrow's document hearing and on Thursday as well. He would like to rest in the detention facility entirely in order to be in good shape to attend proceedings when the next series of witnesses will testify next week. We have filed a waiver regarding the documents hearings. We did that last time, and we are ready to do it again for the hearing of tomorrow and after tomorrow. I thank you, Mr. President.
The President thanks you, Counsel. Mr. Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief. In response to the issue raised regarding the document process, Counsel should understand that there's a procedure. If they wish to use documents, they simply need to file a motion with the court identifying them. Our position has been not to object when the defense identify documents relating to witnesses, use the procedures, and bring them before the court. My point in rising was to make sure the court was aware that this was not a document that had been submitted to it. In contrast, I must note that although we made a very good faith effort to identify all documents we were aware of, every time we seek to introduce or file such a motion, the Kyu Sampan defense is a regular party that objects to that. Notwithstanding that, if the Kyu Sampan defense had followed the proper procedure, we would have no objection when they identify new documents that are relevant to witnesses. So I simply wish to correct the record as it was portrayed by a defense counsel.
The President, after having noted the relevant issues concerning the documents to be put before the Chamber still maintains its firm position concerning the practice so far, and we also take that the position by the co-prosecutor very valid, and counsel for Mr. Kyo Samphan, when it comes to your request concerning Mr. Kyo Samphan waiver to be present during the hearings for the future, in particular the very near future, the Chamber will look into this request and notify the counsel for Mr. Kyo Samphan by this afternoon. Doctors who are treating the accused at the ECCC will then be summoned to re-examine Mr. Kyo Samphan's health condition, and that the Chamber will have to be updated and informed on this before we can rule upon the request accordingly. Next, the Chamber would like to proceed to another issue to be discussed before the Chamber concerning the key documents to be placed before the Chamber concerning the roles of the accused. The Chamber wishes to hear from the prosecution as to whether they have already been prepared to place the documents and give the presentation on such a request for documents, and how much time would they need for such a session, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll relay to you my understanding as I stand here. We are preparing. We were preparing to start Wednesday morning, and our anticipated length of time was 2 days in total. We will commence with documents related to the role of Ieng Sary, followed by Kyo Samphan, and ending with Noon Chea. And I'm not sure whether, if the court is inquiring whether we are ready to start this afternoon. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm not sure about our plan. We are ready to start tomorrow morning, and we will start with documents related to accused Ieng Sary.
The President, thank you. We would like to also know from the lead co-lawyers for the civil parties concerning the same topic, please.
For our part, we do not wish to present documents on the role of the accused. Now we would like the witnesses and civil parties to be heard first on the role of accused persons, and we will present such documents on the role of accused persons subsequently. We are therefore not ready to present such documents this week or even next week, and we will therefore be requesting that will be postponed.
The President, thank you. We would like now to also get some information concerning this from counsels for Mr. Noon Chea, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this stage, it's difficult for us to give any informed opinion on what our position is going to be. We will visit our client again this afternoon. We have received reports that he is getting better and that maybe he is more capable of instructing us in this respect. However, I anticipate that if we have any objections or submissions to make, we will do it, as indicated earlier, in a written form.
The President, thank you for the information. We would like to now also hear from counsels for Mr. Ieng Sari. Counsel Anadam. Good morning, Mr. President and Your Honors. And thank you. Ieng Sari's counsel position is not that different from Mr. Nguyen Chia's counsels. We would like to ask Mr. Ieng Sari first what we should proceed with this. And regarding these documents hearing, we are still not certain whether we are ready. Nonetheless, we need to discuss this with Mr. Ieng Sari before we can inform the court. So far, we haven't done this yet. The President, thank you. Counsel for Mr. Khew Samphan, you may proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. As far as counsel for Khew Samphan is concerned, our position is very clear. We do not intend to present any documents at this stage of the trial. We are of the view that if we have documents to present, we will do so by pleading, and we haven't reached that stage yet. So we do not have any documents to present now.
The President, thank you, counsels and parties to the proceeding concerning the information you provided for the Chamber. It is now appropriate moment for the adjournment. The next hearing will be resumed tomorrow, commencing from 9 a.m. For tomorrow's sessions, the Chamber will start the document hearing, starting from the key documents concerning the roles of the accused. The floor would be given first to the prosecution, and at the same time, session will be open for parties to take issue or object to any of the documents being proposed. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Khew Samphan and Ieng Sari to the detention facility and have them return to the courtroom tomorrow by 9 a.m. except Mr. Ieng Sari is instructed to return to only his holding cell downstairs, where he can observe the proceedings from there. We await the decision by the Chamber this afternoon to see whether Mr. Khew Samphan should also be returned to the courtroom. The court is adjourned.